Imagine living your entire life believing your worth depends on the approval of those who should love you unconditionally, only to discover that your true happiness lies in a completely unexpected direction. What happens when someone decides to leave behind the pain of family rejection and allows themselves to find a place where they can be truly happy? Prepare to experience a story of overcoming obstacles and self-discovery that will make you rethink everything you know about love and belonging. The pain of being rejected by those who should be the first to love you is one of the deepest and often invisible. Imagine growing up in an environment where, instead of love, you feel only its absence. Where, instead of support, you are constantly devalued, invisible, almost as if you were never an important part of the lives of those who should protect you most. Your own family. This is the reality for many people around the world. But it is also the story of Sofia, our protagonist. Sofia wasn't rejected for a single reason, but rather for a combination of factors that accompanied her throughout her life. From a very young age, she felt the weight of indifference within her home. Her existence seemed like a mere coincidence, something that fit in with family obligations but lacked true significance. Her parents, distracted by their own struggles and frustrations, couldn't see their daughter's emotional needs. They were so immersed in their own anguish that they didn't realize what was happening to Sofia, or perhaps the truth was even more painful. They didn't know how to love her. The child, who should have been welcomed, began to feel the emptiness in her days. Hugs were short, words of support rare. Displays of affection became an obligation, a mechanical gesture, devoid of warmth. Sofia grew up in a place where, instead of hearing words of encouragement or unconditional love, she was often ignored, criticized, and even despised. She felt inadequate, unloved. This lack of support wasn't limited to words. It was also reflected in actions, or the lack thereof. At important moments, like her school performances or her pursuit of achievements, Sofia never received her parents' approving gaze. When something went wrong, the criticism was relentless, and when something went right, the recognition was barely noticeable. The girl grew up believing that to be loved, she needed to be something she wasn't. Perfect. And even then, expectations were always much higher than she could achieve. Sofia constantly found herself in the shadow of what society and her family expected of her, but she never managed to be the person they thought she should be. What she didn't know at the time is that, often, the standards imposed by others aren't the ones that truly define who we are. The feeling of rejection shaped her worldview, making her insecure, filled with doubts about her own worth. Sofia, in her lonely nights, often wondered if she would ever find a place where she was truly accepted. She searched for someone who would see her, who would see inside her, and who wouldn't treat her like a piece of a family puzzle that didn't fit. The pain of rejection became a constant shadow, always lurking, always reminding her that she didn't belong in that family, not in the way she expected. But the greatest pain of all wasn't just the rejection itself. It was the feeling that she had nowhere to turn. There was no one she could trust, no one who truly believed in her. With each passing year, the girl felt more lost, more alone. Every attempt to find solace in others was like a hollow echo, unanswered. And worst of all, she was beginning to believe it was her fault. If she wasn't good enough for her parents, maybe she wasn't good enough for anyone else. This cycle of self-criticism was devastating. She no longer knew what she was doing wrong. Have you, the person watching this story, ever felt something similar? Have you ever felt displaced, not just by a group, but by those who should be your safe haven? It's a feeling difficult to describe. It's as if you're in a place where you should feel safe, but instead, you find yourself in a constant struggle, trying to understand why others can't see your worth. This is the emotional scenario many face, and unfortunately, it's a more common scenario than we'd like to believe. It is at this point that Sofia's true journey begins, a journey not only of escape from pain, but also of discovery. When rejection becomes unbearable, when you feel crushed by a life you didn't choose, it's natural that the desire to change becomes even stronger. Sofia, as difficult as it was, felt deep inside that there was something beyond that scenario of indifference. She began to realize that perhaps it was time to leave, to seek a new path, outside those walls that for so long had been synonymous with suffering. She didn't know what she would find out there, but she knew that staying in that place meant losing what was left of herself. And so, one day, when all seemed lost, Sofia made a decision. The decision to move forward, to walk away from everything that made her feel small and insignificant. She decided that, instead of seeking acceptance from those who could never see her whole self, she would find a place where she could see herself, where she could be who she truly was, without fear of rejection. That was the moment everything began to change. But Sofia's journey was just beginning. She didn't yet know the price of freedom, or the hardship she would face. But something inside her told her the future would be different. And more importantly, she was beginning to realize that her true happiness lay not in being accepted by those who didn't know how to love her, but in accepting and valuing herself just as she truly was. If you've ever been through something similar, or know someone who has, share this video with anyone who needs to hear this story of overcoming rejection. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories that will touch your heart and inspire you to keep going, even in the face of adversity. Follow our journey of overcoming and discover how true happiness can be beyond what we imagine. Sofia always felt like a shadow, a dim presence, trying to fit into a place where she never belonged. The house she lived in, though full of people, was a space devoid of affection, where laughter was rare and words of support were almost non-existent. She looked at others, saw close-knit families, people smiling together, and felt a growing ache, as if an invisible wall separated her from the world. It was as if she were observing life from the outside, always yearning to belong, but never able to break through that invisible barrier that kept her on the margins. Loneliness began to creep into every aspect of Sofia's life, insidiously. As a child, she would often play alone in the corner of the garden, watching others around her with a distant gaze, longing to be included but never knowing how. She knew she didn't belong, but she didn't fully understand why. Her siblings had their own groups of friends. Her parents were more focused on their own problems, and Sofia seemed to be the only one left behind. And as she grew older, this feeling of isolation became increasingly real. Her feelings of loneliness weren't limited to the lack of company. It was the inner emptiness she carried. She had no one to share her anxieties, her fears, her frustrations with. Every tear that fell from her eyes was swallowed by silence. When she sat at the table for family meals, the weight of loneliness enveloped her even more deeply. Conversations flowed, but not to her. She was there, physically present, but emotionally distant, as if on the margins of her own life. As Sofia grew older, loneliness began to take on a new form. She questioned her identity. Who was she, really? If her own family didn't fully accept her, how could she expect to be accepted by others? She found herself constantly trying to conform, to mold herself to fit others' expectations. Yet she still felt like a stranger in her own skin. There was a disconnect between the image she wanted to project and the inner reality of who she truly was. No matter how hard she tried, the feeling of incompleteness, of being less than, never left her. Loneliness also manifested itself in her relationships with others. Sofia became increasingly introverted and withdrawn, fearing that if people truly knew her, they would see her fragility, her pain, and inevitably reject her. Instead of trying to create true connections, she closed herself off. And when she tried to open her heart, she felt too vulnerable, as if she were offering something unworthy of acceptance. It was a vicious cycle. The further she withdrew, the more she felt the pain of loneliness, but at the same time, the more she feared rejection. Loneliness, then, became not just a companion, but an identity. She no longer knew who she was without this constant weight. Sofia began to doubt her own worth, to think that perhaps she was destined to live in this state of emotional abandonment forever. Loneliness was no longer just the lack of people around her, but a lack of self-understanding. She saw herself as an incomplete being, a flawed being who would never be able to fill this void. The weight of not being loved, of not being seen, consumed her from the inside out. In a moment of deep reflection, she wondered if there was something in her nature that caused this withdrawal. Had she done something to deserve this loneliness? Did people, including her own family, see something in her that made her unlovable or unaccepted? She began to question whether the problem lay within her. Sometimes it felt like she was trapped in a prison of her own thoughts and insecurities. Loneliness seemed to be her only constant companion, a burden she carried every day, unsure if she would ever be able to free herself from it. Sofia then found herself at a critical point in her life, where loneliness became her identity, and she began to wonder if she could survive like this any longer. She wondered if someday anyone would truly see her, not just as a presence in a room, but as someone with real feelings, someone with a story and value of their own. She longed for something that seemed distant, unattainable, to be seen, to be understood, to be loved. But the pain of loneliness also generated a feeling of internal struggle. She felt, somewhere deep inside, that she couldn't continue living like this, that she couldn't let loneliness be her only companion. Despite all the pain, there was a small but persistent flame within Sofia that compelled her to believe that things could be different. She knew there was something more, something beyond the rejection she experienced in her family, beyond the weight of loneliness. But where would she begin? How could she begin to break free from this cycle that imprisoned her? Deep down, Sofia was beginning to realize that the answer wasn't in trying to be loved by those who rejected her, but in learning to love herself, to see herself through different eyes, without the pain of constant rejection. But how could she take that first step? How could she break free from the weight of loneliness and begin to believe in her own worth? These questions haunted her as she began to realize that perhaps it was time to rewrite her story. She didn't yet know how, but Sofia was beginning to understand that the key to true freedom lay in finding her own path and no longer waiting for others to validate her. Loneliness, though still present, was beginning to lose some of its weight as she began to open herself to the possibilities of change. But what would come next? She didn't yet know. What she did know was that her journey was just beginning. If you've ever felt this way, lost in your own loneliness, or know someone who's going through something similar, share this story with your loved ones. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue our journey together toward overcoming challenges and new beginnings. Together, we will find the path to emotional freedom. After years of internal struggle, in which the weight of loneliness mixed with hopelessness, something inside Sofia finally snapped. The event that catalyzed this decision wasn't grand or grandiose in the eyes of many, but for her, it was like a revelation, a painful yet necessary rupture. It was during a heated argument with her parents, one random afternoon, that the true magnitude of her situation became apparent. The words exchanged, harsh and merciless, marked the point of no return. It was a conversation about family expectations, past mistakes, and the choices Sofia had made to try to fit in somewhere she'd never felt like she belonged. They were, once, again, demanding of her something she knew she couldn't be, someone who wasn't herself. And suddenly, amidst the heat of the argument, something inside her shattered. The pain of not belonging became clear and irrefutable. She didn't belong there, and perhaps she never had. "Can't you see how much we're trying to help you?" her father said. Frustration etched on his face. Those words, which would normally make Sofia cringe in shame, this time were like a cry for freedom in her mind. Help? She thought. It wasn't help she felt. It was control. It was the constant feeling of being molded into a mold that was never meant for her. There, in that moment, she knew she could no longer continue living in that shadow. Her parents' words echoed, but another question echoed in her mind. How much longer are you going to allow yourself to live this way? And it was then that, for the first time, Sofia looked at herself with a clarity she'd never had before. She knew the pain of rejection was something she would have to deal with, but staying there, in that house that made her feel increasingly small, was no longer an option. The time for change had come. She knew leaving wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that staying would slowly kill her. The decision to leave wasn't made impulsively. In that moment, she understood that leaving didn't just mean escaping the arguments, criticism, and pain, but also meant freeing herself from what was holding her back from being who she truly was. The suffocating feeling that gripped her every time she tried to fit into that cramped space within her family was what led her to realize that she could no longer wait for others to love or accept her in order to love herself. She needed to find a place where she could truly be herself, a place where words of rejection wouldn't constantly echo in her mind, where she could finally be free. The night she made this decision, Sofia felt a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anxiety, excitement, and, above all, a great sense of relief. She looked at her parents, who were still arguing, and something in her heart began to shift. She knew that the decision she was making wasn't just about escaping a painful situation, but about giving herself the chance to reinvent herself, to discover who she truly was outside of that environment. The fear of leaving was undeniable. She knew she was throwing herself into the unknown, with no guarantee of safety, stability, or acceptance. There were so many doubts about what would come next, so many unanswered questions. But as terrifying as it was, the idea of remaining in that place, of continuing to feel insignificant, of being constantly devalued, became even more frightening. What lay ahead seemed to be, at the very least, an opportunity to rise again. She knew the path would be fraught with uncertainty, but she also knew that by taking this step, she would be giving herself the greatest gift, the chance to rewrite her own story. That night was the last time Sofia spent under her roof feeling invisible. She spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on the future she would have to build alone. She knew her journey wouldn't be easy, that the weight of rejection wouldn't dissipate overnight, but the decision to leave was her first victory. It was the first step toward the freedom she'd always dreamed of. And although her heart was heavy, a flame of hope began to grow within her. The next day, with the same courage with which she had made the decision to leave, Sofia began packing her things. The silence that filled the house was overwhelming, but she no longer felt part of that environment. She no longer felt the pain of the absence of love, because by deciding to leave, she was giving herself the possibility of being loved, not by others, but by herself. She knew she was embarking on a path of self-discovery, where she would have to face her fears, overcome the pain of the past, and create new meaning for her life. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She could no longer live to please others, to be something she wasn't. The only thing she knew, deep down, was that she was taking control of her own life. From that moment on, she would be the protagonist of her own story. If you've ever had to make a difficult decision to change your life, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss more stories of overcoming and transformation. Together, we'll take the first step toward emotional freedom and true self-knowledge. When Sofia finally left behind the home that had always made her feel small, she didn't quite know what to expect from the world outside. It was as if she were entering unknown territory, where the future was shrouded in uncertainty, but also brimming with possibilities. The decision to leave was just the first step in a journey she couldn't have foreseen, but which would become the most important of her life, a journey of self-discovery. In the first few days after leaving her family home, Sofia experienced a whirlwind of emotions. There was the relief of being free, but also the fear of what would come next. She found herself alone, without a permanent place to stay, uncertain about what to do next. But somehow, That emptiness seemed to be the necessary price for her transformation. For her, the loneliness that had previously oppressed her now became a fertile ground for growth. She was no longer alone because she was far from her family. Now, she was alone by choice, and this made her feel, for the first time, in control of her own life. Sofia began exploring the world in a way she never had before. Leaving a place where she felt unappreciated, she could now lose herself in the streets of a city that awaited her with new horizons. She began walking through unfamiliar neighborhoods, talking to people she barely knew, and discovering the small pleasures in life that had previously eluded her. Each step outside her comfort zone was a victory, each new encounter a learning experience. It was at that moment that she began to realize something incredible. The world wasn't as oppressive as she'd imagined. On the contrary, there were countless people willing to see her for who she truly was, unfiltered by the family expectations that had stifled her for so long. At first, she felt insecure about being who she was, about showing herself to be vulnerable. But she soon realized that the people around her were more willing to accept and support her choices than she'd ever imagined. She began meeting people who, like her, were searching for something more, something beyond the pain of the past, beyond the limitations life had imposed. She met Sarah, a young woman who had also fled a toxic environment and was now beginning her own journey of self-discovery. Together, they began sharing stories, fears, and dreams. Sofia realized for the first time that she was not alone in the world, and this made her feel welcomed in a new, profound way. Sarah didn't judge her or question her. She simply listened, with a look of understanding, as if she knew what Sofia was going through. Sofia also ventured into new endeavors, volunteering on social projects, helping out at community centers, and collaborating with others who inspired her. Each new experience made her feel more connected to the world and her own potential. She began to understand that she didn't need external validation to feel important. Every small act of kindness she performed, every smile she shared with someone in need, gave her a sense of purpose. She was finding true happiness not in the love of her family, but in discovering how much she could positively impact the lives of others. Her journey wasn't just external. Sofia's true challenge lay in rebuilding her inner self. During the first few months, she faced difficult times. Memories of her family, her home, and the loneliness that had always accompanied her still haunted her. But she began to understand that these memories didn't have to define who she was. She began to look at herself with new eyes, without putting so much pressure on herself. Gradually, she learned to forgive not only her family, but also herself. Sofia understood that there was no need to carry the weight of guilt or rejection. She was no longer the girl who lived in the shadows, trying to be someone she wasn't. Sofia's self-discovery deepened as she began to explore her own interests and passions, those that had always been stifled by trying to please others. She engaged in creative pursuits like painting and writing, things she had always harbored within herself, but never had the courage to explore. She began to see that her identity lay not in being accepted by others, but in being true to herself. The journey to discovering who Sofia truly was difficult, but liberating. And, with each new day, she felt closer to becoming the woman she always wanted to be. One of the most memorable experiences of this journey was when Sofia decided to take a solo trip to a city she'd always wanted to visit. She embarked alone, unsure of what awaited her, but confident that this journey wasn't just an escape, but an opportunity to reconnect with herself. During this trip, Sofia had the time and space to reflect on the path she'd taken to get there. She walked the city's narrow streets, sampled the local food, met people from different cultures, and, most importantly, found herself. During the trip, Sofia had an epiphany. She realized that despite everything she had been through, she had never lost her ability to love and connect with the world. She now understood that happiness didn't depend on what her family thought or how others saw her, but on her ability to be authentic to herself. She no longer needed to mold herself to please anyone. True power lay in being authentic, in following her own desires, and above all, in allowing herself to be happy, regardless of any external approval. When Sofia returned from this trip, she was no longer the same. She had rediscovered herself, faced her fears and insecurities, and learned to love and value herself. She knew the road ahead was still long, but now she was ready to move forward, without fear of losing herself, because, along this journey, she had finally found the only thing that truly mattered: herself. If you're also on a quest for self-discovery or know someone who is, share this video and inspire others to find themselves. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more stories of transformation and overcoming. Together, we will continue life's journey, discovering who we are and what truly makes us happy. When Sofia took her first steps on her journey of self-discovery, she had no idea how profound and transformative the small victories she would achieve along the way would be. After so long feeling like an outsider in her own life, the possibility of achieving something significant seemed distant, almost unbelievable. But as she allowed herself to explore new possibilities, something incredible happened. The small victories began to accumulate, and with them, her confidence and self-esteem began to grow. Sofia's first major breakthrough came when, with much effort and nervousness, she decided to look for a job. It wasn't just any job. She wanted something that truly fulfilled her, something that connected her with her passion and helped her grow. She knew that to do this, she would have to step outside her comfort zone and believe in her abilities, which she had previously deeply doubted. But unlike before, when she felt worthless, now she felt determined to give her best, to show the world who she truly was. Sofia spent days searching for jobs, writing resumes, and even preparing for interviews. At first, she felt a wave of insecurity with every step. But as she faced these challenges, she began to realize that, despite her doubt, she was growing. She learned to communicate more clearly, to value herself during interviews, and to demonstrate her skills and qualities with confidence. Deep down, she knew there was something inside her that was valuable, something that could be recognized and appreciated. She just needed to believe it. And it was during one of these interviews that she received the opportunity that would change her life. She was accepted for an assistant position at a small graphic design firm. For Sofia, this wasn't just a job opportunity. It was a chance to build something of her own, to prove to herself that she was capable of achieving whatever she wanted, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but the excitement of starting something new motivated her. Finally, she was doing something that made her feel useful, something that connected her with her true passion for art and design. When she started work, Sofia quickly realized she was in a completely different environment from anything she had experienced before. Her colleagues were inspiring, creative, and most importantly, willing to help her grow. At first, she felt the weight of her inexperience. Some tasks seemed challenging, and she often questioned whether she was doing the right thing. However, something very different began to happen. With each small challenge, she felt more capable of facing it. Each completed project, no matter how simple, represented a victory, a validation of her own abilities. The job wasn't just an opportunity to earn money, but also to learn and reinvent herself. Sofia began honing her design skills, something she'd always dreamed of, but never really tried. She dedicated hours to studying graphic design programs, watching tutorials, practicing, and improving every day. The feeling of continuous learning was transformative. She realized that when she allowed herself to push herself and invest time in something she truly loved, she could achieve things she previously thought impossible. She, who once thought she'd never be good enough, now clearly saw that her potential was limitless. Furthermore, her work began to generate recognition. She began to be nominated for new projects within the company, and her capacity for innovation stood out. This was concrete proof that Sofia was no longer the person who saw herself as worthless and lacking in potential. Now, she was someone with something to offer the world. Every compliment, every positive feedback, made her feel more confident and empowered. She was finally making a difference. But Sofia's achievements didn't stop there. Over time, she began to realize that, as she acquired new skills, she was also becoming more independent and self-assured. She began making choices that reflected her personal growth. She made new friends, established new routines, and began engaging more in activities that made her feel good about herself. The simple act of learning a new skill, of achieving a personal victory, became fuel to keep going. The first time she did something she thought impossible, creating a design project alone, without anyone's help, was a milestone. That project, though small to others, represented a major victory for her. She could finally see herself as a professional, someone with something valuable to offer. She was proving herself, not to others, but to herself. And with each new step, she began to realize that the limitations that once paralyzed her were, in fact, just beliefs she had created. The most beautiful thing about all of this was the impact of this journey of self-discovery. As she achieved victories, the pieces of her emotional puzzle began to fall into place. Her family's rejection, which had previously seemed like a sentence of failure, no longer dictated who she was. Sofia was finally rebuilding herself, and with each new skill she acquired, she saw how capable she was of transforming her life. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The work she dedicated herself to was not just a means of support, but a means of self-validation. Every personal achievement, no matter how small, made her grow and led her to a deeper level of self-understanding. Sofia was finally learning to love and value herself the way she deserved, and this was reflected not only in her work, but also in her personal life. If you've also found small victories on your journey of self-discovery, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the path to transformation begins with small, daily achievements. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more inspiring stories about overcoming obstacles and personal growth. We're all in this journey of discovery and achievement together. Sofia's journey was slowly becoming a story of self-discovery and overcoming obstacles. But something even more transformative was about to happen. She began meeting people who truly saw her, not just as one of the crowd, not just as someone to be ignored or rejected, but as a person with value, history, and potential. These encounters began to emerge like small miracles in unexpected moments, and were fundamental to her truly building the self-esteem she so longed for. It all started simply, with a smile. Sofia was in a coffee shop, alone, as she often was in the first few days after leaving home. She was focused on her laptop, working on a design project, when a woman approached, smiling, and asked if she could sit at a table. Sofia, a little surprised, accepted. The woman, named Clara, was a digital artist, and they immediately began talking about Sofia's work. Hearing her words and seeing her dedication, Clara didn't hesitate to praise her. "You have so much talent," she said, with a sparkle in her eye. "I see something special in you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those words fell like a balm on Sofia's heart, who had long believed her creativity to be insignificant. The praise was more than just recognition. It was a nudge that made her realize that perhaps she had something valuable to offer. The conversation with Clara didn't last long, but it was enough to plant a seed of confidence in Sofia. She knew she still had much to learn and achieve, but that encounter made her believe for the first time that her work could truly make a difference. This was just the first of many meaningful encounters that would occur in her life. As Sofia began to open up more to the world and allow herself to be vulnerable, she realized that the people around her were more willing than she imagined to support and encourage her. Each time she met someone new, or even developed deeper connections with people she already knew, she felt seen in a way she never had been at home. They saw her potential, her capacity for growth, and were willing to walk alongside her. The second encounter that had a profound impact on her life was with Luis, a co-worker who soon became a close friend. Luis had gone through similar life experiences to Sofia. He too had been rejected by his family and distanced himself from people who didn't understand him. He, like her, started from scratch and understood the struggles she faced. Their friendship wasn't based on judgment, but on genuine support. Luis always told Sofia that she was stronger than she imagined, and that for her, the sky was the limit. His words motivated her to go further, to believe that life could be much more than the limitations she had imposed on herself. These encounters were like lights shining on a previously dark path. They began to show Sofia that she didn't have to carry the weight of loneliness alone, that she could trust other people, and that yes, there were people willing to support her without self-interest or judgment. That was the big difference. She didn't have to seek acceptance from those who didn't see her worth. She could invest in relationships with people who appreciated her for who she truly was. With each new friendship, each word of encouragement, Sofia's self-esteem was rebuilt. She began to understand that how she saw herself didn't depend on others' views of her, but on how much she believed in herself. And by being surrounded by people who made her feel valued, Sofia found herself, for the first time, beginning to trust her own worth. The impact of these meetings was also evident in her professional life. Her confidence grew. She took more risks and began to express her ideas clearly. When new job opportunities arose, Sofia threw herself into them headfirst, freed from the constant fear of failure. She realized she was no longer alone on this journey, and more importantly, that she didn't have to be perfect to be worthy of respect and recognition. Every friendship and every word of support she received helped her see that what she had lost in her family, she could find in the world. People who saw her not as a failure, but as someone with a purpose. It was with these people that Sofia began to open herself to new possibilities. And it was because of these people that she began to see herself, not just as someone who had been rejected, but as someone capable of achieving her happiness and her place in the world. Sofia's relationship with Clara and Luis grew, and over time, she began to attract more people into her life, people who respected her, loved her, and supported her on her journey. Each of these encounters was like a piece of a puzzle, gradually forming a clear picture of what she truly deserved: genuine love, unconditional support, and the opportunity to be who she always was, without fear or shame. Little by little, Sofia learned to value these connections, to nurture these relationships, and to be grateful for having finally found her place in the world. She no longer needed to seek approval from her family or anyone else who didn't understand her. She was surrounded by people who valued her for who she was, and that made all the difference. If you've ever found someone who truly believed in you, share this video with that person who made a difference in your life. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more stories that celebrate the importance of being truly seen and appreciated. Together, let's continue our journey of self-discovery and connection. As Sofia advanced on her journey of self-discovery, something important was beginning to happen within her. The scars of the past, which once seemed like open wounds, began to transform into marks that told a story of overcoming. She knew that to move forward, she needed to confront the pain she carried, the pain that was so deeply rooted in her soul. And more than that, she knew she needed to learn to forgive her family, and most importantly, forgive herself. Sofia's first days of freedom were marked by a sense of relief. She had freed herself from the weight of rejection and indifference, and the world outside seemed to offer endless possibilities. But as she physically distanced herself from her family and the home where she grew up, something inside her still prevented her from moving on completely. The memories, unresolved feelings, and unaddressed issues continued to haunt her. Sofia knew she couldn't move forward without dealing with the wounds of her past. She realized that the pain of rejection couldn't be ignored forever. That resentment and bitterness still had the power to hold her back. The pain of not being loved unconditionally by those she loved most was still there, alive in her chest. But at the same time, she began to realize that forgiveness wasn't just a gift to others, but a gift to herself. The process of forgiveness, however, was not easy. When it comes to forgiveness, the human mind tends to be divided. One part wants to free itself from the pain, while another part feels betrayed and unable to forget. But Sofia knew that true forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about releasing the pain that imprisoned her. She understood that by carrying the weight of anger and resentment, she wasn't just punishing herself for what her family had done to her, but also preventing herself from living fully. At first, she tried to deny the pain. At times, she told herself she didn't care anymore, that she was free of it all. But the truth is, no matter how hard she tried to hide the scars, they were still there. She knew she needed to face them, not to relive the suffering, but to understand what they truly meant in her life. It was then that Sofia began to reflect, more clearly, on the role her family played in her story. She saw that, despite everything, those moments of rejection, of pain, had also shaped who she had become. She couldn't erase the past, but she could change the way she saw it. It was during a conversation with Clara, her artist friend, that Sofia began to better understand the process of forgiveness. Clara, upon hearing her story, told her something that stuck with her. Forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. Forgiveness is for you. When you forgive, you don't erase what happened, but you decide that the pain will no longer rule your life. That phrase was a turning point for Sofia. She finally understood that forgiveness didn't mean letting go of the pain or the experience she had, but rather removing its power over her future life. She then began to free herself from the need for her family to apologize. She understood that if she waited for people from her past to change, she might be missing out on the chance to create a different future. Sofia gave herself permission to move forward without the burden of demanding an apology. She realized that by doing so, she was finally taking control of her own story. Forgiving herself was perhaps the hardest part. Sofia viewed herself critically, believing that by failing to change her family, by failing to prevent the pain she experienced, she had somehow failed. She carried deep guilt for thinking she could have done more to change her situation, to make things work out. But over time, Sofia realized that, in fact, she was doing the best she could with her circumstances. She was not responsible for her family's choices, much less for how she was treated. The biggest step toward self-forgiveness came when she looked back on her own journey and realized the achievements she had made on her own. She recognized that, despite all the difficulties, she had gotten this far, and that this was a source of pride. She forgave herself for putting too much pressure on herself, for doubting her abilities, and for blaming herself for other people's decisions. Sofia began to value herself more, to recognize the small victories she had achieved, and to understand that the healing process was not linear. There were good days and bad days, but each day she faced was an achievement. As Sofia released her anger and resentment, she began to feel a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer defined by the choices of others, nor by the pain of the past. She was finally becoming the person she always wanted to be, someone capable of creating a future of peace and happiness, unencumbered by the chains of what held her back from living fully. This process of overcoming the scars of the past also brought a renewed understanding of the importance of personal achievements. Looking back at her victories, big and small, Sofia realized that each one brought her closer to who she truly wanted to be. She knew the journey to healing was far from over, but now she could clearly see that she was on the right path, and that, in itself, was a huge achievement. If you're also facing the challenge of overcoming past pain, or if you know someone who could benefit from this story, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more videos that help us move forward, forgive, and create a better future. Together, we will continue our journey of overcoming with strength and determination to write our own destiny. Sofia's journey wasn't easy, and she knew it. But with each step, with each small moment of overcoming, she moved closer to the most important discovery of her life. True happiness didn't depend on external approval. It wasn't based on gaining acceptance from her family or anyone else who had failed to see her for who she truly was. True happiness, she realized, came from self-love and the genuine relationships she began to build throughout her journey. In the first months after leaving home, Sofia's sense of freedom was remarkable. She finally felt free from the shackles of the past, no longer having to live up to the expectations of those who never fully understood her. But this freedom also brought with it a new responsibility, finding within herself the strength to rise. Again, to love herself, and most importantly, to believe that she deserved happiness. The pain of rejection and loneliness had been a constant companion for so long, and now, as she looked back at her life, Sofia realized that this pain no longer needed to dictate who she was or what she could achieve. The most important thing she learned was that happiness doesn't come from outside, but from within. In the early days of her journey, she searched the world for answers, hoping to find a place or a person who would finally make her feel complete. But over time, she realized that nothing and no one could fill the void she carried. What she needed, more than anything, was to learn to look at herself with love, to accept and respect herself. She discovered that happiness is a state of mind that comes from accepting who we are, with all our imperfections, flaws, and unfulfilled dreams. The first small victories at work, the new friendships that emerged, and the moments of self-discovery she experienced helped her realize that happiness wasn't about finding a place to fit in, but about being true to herself. With each new project she completed, with each smile shared with friends like Clara and Luis, Sofia began to understand that true happiness isn't found in seeking validation from others, but in the ability to be who we are, without masks and without fear of rejection. She began to realize that, despite all the hardships she had faced, there was something within her that had always been strong, something that sustained her through the hardest times. She had overcome abandonment, the pain of rejection, and now she was at peace with herself. In one of her most introspective moments, while walking through the city streets, Sofia smiled to herself, as if she had finally found the place where she had always belonged, within herself. It was also in her relationships with those around her that she found a reflection of her own growth. The genuine connection she made with Clara, Luis, and others who crossed her path were not based on expectations or the need for approval, but on mutual acceptance and genuine support. She learned that happiness also comes from the relationships we build when we are willing to show ourselves vulnerable and authentic. With these friends, Sofia understood that life is richer and more meaningful when shared with those who truly see and accept us for who we are. Sofia also began investing more time in her own passions, which had been relegated to the background for so long. Her design work was no longer just a job, but a form of expression, a way to connect with her inner self. By dedicating herself to what she loved, she began to realize that her happiness didn't depend on anyone's approval, but on the personal satisfaction she felt in doing something that inspired and challenged her. She became more involved in art, began exploring new forms of creative expression, and saw herself blossom in ways that had previously seemed impossible. True happiness also lay in the little things she now valued more intensely. The simple act of waking up early to walk outdoors, enjoying a quiet meal with friends, or simply sitting in silence to reflect on her life. All of this became immensely valuable to her. Sofia realized that happiness lies in the everyday moments, in the serenity of living a life unfettered by the past. And above all, she understood that there was nothing left in her life that needed fixing or resolving, for she was complete in herself. Her family, which had previously been the center of her frustrations and anguish, now occupied a different place in her life. Sofia no longer sought their acceptance, but she understood that by freeing herself from the pain of rejection, she also freed herself emotionally from the expectations that held her back. The forgiveness she had given herself allowed her to move forward, regardless of what her family thought or said. She was finally at peace. Sofia's greatest epiphany came when, reflecting on her journey, she realized that happiness isn't about reaching a final destination. It's not about conquering something or someone to feel complete. Happiness, for her, was the continuous process of self-discovery, self-acceptance, and surrounding herself with people who value her. She understood that life is made up of ups and downs, challenges and overcoming, and that true happiness lies in knowing how to deal with these moments, embrace them, and move forward, always seeking a new chapter. Today, Sofia no longer seeks answers in the past, or expects her happiness to depend on those who rejected her. She found the key to her emotional freedom in the power of self-love and the genuine relationships she cultivated. Looking back, she knew that everything she experienced, the pain, the rejection, the loneliness, was necessary for her to understand what truly mattered, being happy with herself. If you've also found true happiness within yourself, or are on this journey of self-discovery, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more videos about overcoming challenges, self-love, and happiness. Together, we will continue to seek the best version of ourselves.